I've been asked several times what camera settings I use with the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro to get the best video quality. The settings are very simple, but I'll tell you now, I don't at all use the normal colour profile, and I've been very transparent about the fact that I really dislike the unnatural HDR look of the footage when you shoot in normal, and I really hope DJI works on it. So before going any further, I do want to say that all the settings that I'm talking about are in reference to shooting in D-Log-M, which always just looks so good, as you can see for yourself now. And if you're at all worried about actually shooting in D-Log-M because you don't quite know how to colour correct it or how to colour grade it, it's actually not as difficult as you might think. And later on, I'll show you a very quick and simple way to convert the footage to a normal colour space without having to go into the complexities of colour grading. So this is going to be totally easy, even for complete beginners. So first off, I mainly use auto exposure these days because the results are still great, and most of the time I just want to be quick and not faffing around with switching out filters when I'm on the go. If I know I'm going to be in one spot and I'm not really going to be moving around much, then I might consider using filters and shooting in manual just to have more control. But in general, auto exposure has been fine, but I do make several tweaks to the settings to really maximise the final look and get the best quality in auto. So I'll run through those now. So as I mentioned with the Osmo Action 5 Pro, I only shoot in D-Log-M 10-bit. I don't use HDL because it's more of a faff to work with, and D-Log-M just looks great anyway. But the first adjustment that I like to make is to the overall exposure. So just like with the Osmo Action 4 or even the Osmo Pocket 3, I always adjust the EV meter. And that's regardless of whether I shoot in the normal colour profile or D-Log-M. So for D-Log-M, I set my EV meter to -0.3 or -0.7. Which one I choose is going to depend on the scene and where I'm going to be moving around, but I find that in most scenarios, -0.3 is enough and the highlights will usually still be intact. And whilst I'm on the subject of moving around, I really want to quickly talk about tracking with the Osmo Action 5 Pro, because the Osmo Action 5 Pro has a setting to track you kind of like the Osmo Pocket 3 does, but it's not intended to be used in the same way, because the Osmo Action 5 Pro is trying to keep you central in the frame, whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 is allowing you to move around the frame whilst the camera tracks you as you move around. And so one of the ways to have that feature with the Osmo Action 5 Pro is to use a gimbal like the iSteady MT2 by Hohem, this video sponsor. It's a pretty cool gimbal because you can use it for a number of cameras, your phone, a small compact camera, and action cameras. And the main feature that I love about it is the AI tracking module, which will accurately track you, and there's no need for an app or anything to get it working. All you have to do is use hand gestures to start and stop the tracking, and once it's registered you in the frame, it'll just keep tracking you until you stop it. So for situations where you want to have your Action 5 Pro, you want to put it down and you want to be walking around and still be in the frame and make sure that you're in your frame, then this is a really good option for that. Plus, the tracking module doubles up as an RGB fill light as well, which could be pretty handy in low light situations. And if you already like to use gimbals because you like to use them for shooting B-roll or awkward angles, or just keep slow shots really steady, then the iSteady MT2 is a really nice gimbal to use, and it's got a really good grip and it's just really smooth. So I've dropped a link in the description so you can check it out in more detail, and thanks to Hohem for sponsoring this video. Okay, so when it comes to white balance, there are times that I'll set this automatically, and it's generally if I know that the scene's going to change. So if I'm going from indoors to outdoors or vice versa, and I know that the overall temperature of the scene is going to be different as I'm moving around. If I know the scene is going to stay the same, then I'll set the white balance manually so that there's no chance of there being any slight fluctuations in the colour temperatures. And as I've mentioned in previous videos where I've talked about my settings with DJI cameras, there's a really cool trick where you can set the white balance manually without having to think too much about what setting to use. And so if you're unsure about what Kelvin value to set, you can basically hold the camera up in the scene, have it on auto, and then immediately switch to manual, and that's going to give you basically the most accurate white balance that you can use for that specific scene at hand. Alternatively, when setting to manual outdoors, I generally set it to between 5500 Kelvin and 5700 Kelvin depending on the lighting, because that's basically daylight. For overcast days, 5500 Kelvin works well as well. If it's brighter, then you can just use the auto to manual trick for more accurate results. So the next setting that has quite an effect on the overall look of the footage is sharpening and noise reduction. And I found that the best settings for me, at least, are setting sharpness to -2, which is essentially off, and then setting noise reduction to -1, which adds a slight amount of noise reduction without overdoing it. By default, the sharpness is actually set to 0, but I feel like that can be a little bit overdone and it's just too crispy and over-processed looking. So by turning it down, or essentially off, as -2 is basically off, you can add sharpness back in later in the edit. So for example, in Final Cut Pro, I typically add sharpness at a level of 1, which works well for most clips. When it comes to setting my ISO, I tend to have it set to the absolute minimum and maximum values, because when you have light or you're shooting during the day, the Action 5 isn't actually going to push the ISO up so high that it'll have a negative impact on the overall quality of the footage. The only time that I'd actually adjust it is for nighttime shots, and I'll do a separate video about that because I'll go through my entire settings for shooting in low light and nighttime, because I think I've finally settled on the best combination since I've been tinkering around, so keep an eye out for that video. I always shoot in 4K 25 FPS. 4K gives the highest image quality, and 25 FPS is mainly down to my region and where I am. So if you're in a region that uses 60 Hz electricity, then you might prefer to shoot in 30 FPS to avoid flickering lights. But for a more cinematic look, you could shoot in 24 FPS. So since I'm in the UK, I just stick with 25 FPS so that I can prevent lights from flickering. Shutter speed also affects this, which is where filters come into play, but that's something to go over in another video. For the field of view, because the Action 5 is so wide by default anyway, I generally have the field of view set to standard D-warp to eliminate any distortion, and I find that that gives a really nice feel to the footage. You can see my background and my surroundings, which is great when you're in a cool or picturesque location. And for my stabilisation, I have it set to rock steady. The footage is really smooth and it's stable whilst I'm walking around and talking. So remember how I said in the beginning that there's a really simple way to actually convert your D-Log-M footage to a normal colour space? If you're using your phone to edit the footage, you can actually do this in the Mimo app very easily. All you have to do is go into your album of clips and then choose any clip that you want that was shot in D-Log-M. I'll grab this one. And then you'll see here that you've got this colour recovery icon. When you click on that, it's literally going to convert it for you. It's that easy. So this is D-Log-M before the conversion and then D-Log-M after the colour conversion. And then you can just go ahead and export the clip, choose your different settings, and then you're good to go. The second way, if you're actually editing on your computer, is to use a LUT. DJI has a free one that you can get going with, and all you have to do is add it to your footage. You can dial it back if it's too strong, and that is pretty much it. If you want to actually colour grade the footage, so give the footage a specific look, let me know in the comments and I'll show you my full process in another video. Otherwise, I've dropped a link in the description to the Hohem iSteady MT2 so you can check it out for yourself, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.